Okay, Philos 71. I'm going to try and wrap up my little series here today. Going to start out with wrapping up your statements about cavemen. I'm not quite sure which one of those considered cavemen, if they were Neanderthals or if there was one of the other ones that we call cavemen that were actually our ancestors. Bit out of touch with that. But basically our evolutionary ancestors would have most likely, much like we did throughout much of our history, possessed a very limited form of morality, which would have been pretty much limited to family units and tribal units. And what this pretty much means is that in your example, well, they probably would have had no trouble killing their fellow, well, basically tribal competition, another tribe. They probably would have killed in pretty much a heartbeat for over competition for resources. And that sadly was not just our evolutionary ancestors, but that was human beings throughout most of history, and this is pretty much all the way into the Bible. I mean, the Israelites' genocides pretty much follow the pattern of the same sort of tribal genocides that were enacted throughout history at that time. They pretty much, most people, most tribes at that time thought that their gods were 100% behind them and wanted the competition eliminated in little mini holy wars, and that basically they were chosen races. They were the chosen race, and the people that had the stuff they wanted were in some way, shape, or form subhuman, not real people. So your example, basically the only way that the caveman would have most likely felt guilt is if his neighboring village person was, if the neighboring village was basically an offshoot of their tribe and they still had some sort of cultural connection, and they considered them allies and considered them people in the same way that they considered themselves people, which could or could not be the case. And the evolutionary reason that a person would actually feel guilt over killing someone that they considered family and an ally is because, yes, we have reinforcement of wanting to keep people that are beneficially useful to us in the long term alive, and impulsive short-term profit at the expense of long-term survival can cause, when our understanding catches up with past our momentary thrill of acquisition, we can feel something much like remorse that our long-term benefits have been extinguished over a very ultimately small profit. Okay, moving on from this, I want to get to question 5. I want to get it done with. You talk about the existence of life, the origin of life, and does this happen anywhere else in the universe, and how can we consider this to be anything other than intelligent design, anything other than the creation of an intelligence? That's very simple, actually. Things going from simple to complex happens throughout the universe. One of the best examples is stars. Stars are largely formed of hydrogen atoms. Hydrogen atoms make up about 75% of the universal elemental particles. They make up 90% of all atoms. And they were basically, for the most part, the original atoms. And most of all other atoms and molecules come from hydrogen atoms. And what happens is, in stars, gravity pulls together large collections of hydrogen atoms until the mass reaches a state where the pressure generates sufficient heat to ignite them, basically in atomic fusion. What that means is basically they're, if I understand it properly, they're broken apart and reassembled into varying new atoms. So basically, we start out with just hydrogen atoms, the most simple of atoms, and they are, through naturalistic forces, ripped apart, releasing energy, and forming a wide variety of new atoms. And thus the diversity of atoms in the universe is increased. This goes from simple to complex, and we see some of the same principles in nature. We see things growing more diverse through naturalistic forces without any apparent aid of a cosmic being. So naturalistic forces, apparently, there's no evidence that any god is actually ripping apart those atoms and reassembling them in their new atomic forms, just the same as there's no evidence that the diversity of life through evolution is the result of God's tinkering. Not saying it's not possible that a God is involved, but there's no evidence for it, and until there's evidence for it, stating that such is the case is a multiplication of entities. You mentioned that intelligence leaves behind a characteristic trademark or signature of intelligence, pretty much. Well, this to a great extent sounds like an anthropomorphic projection of our mannerisms and the ways in which we act upon the universe at large. It also, in a way, could sound like, let's see if I get this word right, pareidolia, which is basically the way in which human pattern recognition software in the brain sees patterns in things that aren't actually there. It's why we see faces in wood grain, whether it be Jesus or just Elvis, whether it's the King of Kings or just the King, in things like, as I said, wood grain and on toast. Our brain has pattern recognition software. It's where we basically put together various clues into a visual representation, and it gives us a warning of, say, a tiger about to leap out of us. Well, from time to time it misfires and we see an outline and a bit of traces of shadow as something that's a threat to us. We jump back and then realize what has actually happened. But this pattern recognition software in the brain is pretty much always active, and it can misfire. It can see patterns where there's basically not a pattern there. You mentioned woodcuts, and of course human art is the product of a human artist. We see the art produced, and for one thing, the art is not capable of sexual reproduction with variation over time. It is not subject to the forces of natural selection. Some woodcuts aren't going to find themselves selected by naturalistic forces and thus refined over time, whereas the less worthy ones will be eliminated from the woodcut gene pool. It just doesn't happen like that. That's why we discern the product of human creation from what appears to be unguided naturalistic forces changing the universe around us, changing the world around us, changing objects within it at least. Okay, your last statement was pretty much a big combination of straw men. Evolution, again, is not just time and chance. The Big Bang is, again, for the most part, most theories that I've heard, is not something coming out of nothing. It is a change of what was before into what is now. Yes, morality is evolving and being developed. That is at least not straw man. That just seems to be the truth of the situation. Humanity in the end is not something that arises apart from nature. We are a part of nature. Okay, I'm not sure how much time I have left. I wanted to go into a brief side note. You mentioned the God of the Gaps in your video as something that was a phrase coined by Richard Dawkins. It was not actually coined by Richard Dawkins. In fact, it dates from a variation of the term from a Christian named Henry Drummond, in which he talked of gaps which they fill up with God. When he was addressing other Christians, he was basically giving us pro-science message, and he was basically saying that we can't try and pin God into gaps in our ignorance. It is a statement that's been used many times since then, in the 50s and the 70s. It's not something Dawkins came up with. I only mention this because I see something of a trend among people to, as